The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, here on the Hill. Could multi-billion-dollar college endowments be taxed as a result of out-of-control campus protests? What about Donald Trump's plans for mass deportations or the possibility of the Biden administration allowing for Palestinian refugees? And what does he think about Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman who wants him gone? You will hear from the top Republican in Washington in moments. Come on in, I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. All right, big day here on The Hill. Hanging out with us for it all, Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill Sunday and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. Scott Bolden, former D.C. Democratic Party chairman, NewsNation contributor as well. Aaron Perini is a Republican strategist. And Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House chief of staff, NewsNation contributor, joining us for the hour as well. Hello, Mick. Hello to you all. Nice to have you in. I think we're going to have a little bit of news here. Coming up here on the top of the show, I spoke with the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, for about 10 minutes. I spoke to him, of course, about college campuses, right? The biggest story that's going on right now. We see the live pictures happening at Fordham University. The border, which is what we've been reporting on for, years now here on NewsNation. And then his future. There have been lots of conversations in this town about what's going to happen to Mike Johnson. We had some news on that front today. We will get to his future in a moment, but first, here is the first part of my interview with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. So, Mr. Speaker, thanks for being with us here on the Hill.
Happy to be with you.
Appreciate the time. So, you say that you could go after the funding sources out of these universities if they don't essentially get their act together quickly. So let's tick through some of the things that Congress could do. Maybe tax the endowments, pull federal funding for grants, maybe go after student loans. What is realistically right now on the table for Congress as you see it?
Well, we have deputized our committees of jurisdiction. There's a number of committees that touch on some element of this. It's not just the House Education and Workforce Committee, but it's also Judiciary. It's Ways and Means. It's the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's Science, Space, and Technology. Some of the committees have jurisdiction over the grants that are given to these universities. They collect billions of dollars. There's a lot of federal funding that makes its way into these institutions, and if they cannot respect the most basic constitutional rights, the civil rights of their students, and protect them, their safety, then they don't deserve to be funded by the taxpayers.
What about the endowments?
Well, that's a big
These are tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about whether they should be taxed. They also get very generous tax benefits as they operate as nonprofits. All that is on the table. There'll be a lot of discussion, investigation. We have to do what we must to stamp this out. This anti-Semitism movement is dangerous. This is not constitutionally protected free speech. I was a constitutional law attorney. I ironically used to litigate campus free speech cases. Okay, this is far over the line. This is inciting violence. They are physically threatening fellow students, closing campuses down, occupying buildings, destroying property. These are common criminals, and they need to be treated as such.
The White House has condemned this. We have heard from the press secretary, we have heard from statements from the White House, but we haven't heard from President Biden himself since April 22nd in basically a 10-second or so moment on camera. Why do you think the president has been close to silent on this issue, at least in front, as it relates to getting in front of the camera, making a statement, and just sort of laying out where he stands?
The silence is deafening. The president needs to speak with moral clarity in this fateful moment of our country. We're doing that. I'm doing that as the House Speaker. My colleagues in the House are doing that. But Chuck Schumer has been pretty silent on this, and President Biden noticeably.
Why do you think?
Well, I have some theories about that. I think they assess this to be a real political problem for them. There is a growing not just pro-Palestinian, but now pro-Hamas wing in the Democratic Party. And they're going to have a problem. I think that they assess that they will lose the state of Michigan and possibly Nevada and others because of the conflict in their own party. But this is no time for politics. It's no time for equivocation. This is not a gray area. This is right and wrong. And the President of the United States should speak to that and say it that clearly.
You mentioned Hamas. We have heard some, of course, not all of the protesters, but we have heard some celebrate Hamas. Of course, Hamas is a foreign terrorist organization. We saw the Intifada flag that was flown at that university building at Columbia University. Should the FBI step in and investigate here? I
think it's a dangerous situation. Hamas openly endorsed the protest at Columbia University. They literally did that an hour before we spoke there last Wednesday. We had a press event, and I met with the president of the university, President Shafiq, in her own conference room, and I told her with four of my colleagues from the House, she needed to resign if she could not get control of the situation. What's happened at the campus, the escalation, the violence, the necessity of the NYPD coming in to break it all up, never had to happen. We need administrators to step up, university officials to step up and do their job. The most basic function that they have is the safety and security of their students.
Too far at this point for the FBI to look into this, or not necessarily?
No, I wouldn't say. I think the FBI needs to be all over this. I think they need to look at the root causes and find out if some of this was funded by, I don't know, George Soros or overseas entities. There's a sort of a common theme and a common strategy that seems to be pursued on many of these campuses. I noticed myself, and many of us did, while we were on site at Columbia University, the tents at their little encampment there, many of them matched. They were same color, make, and model. Did somebody purchase that and send it in? It looks pretty orchestrated to me.
CBS is reporting, speaking of the war between Israel and Hamas, they're reporting that the Biden administration is looking into offering permanent safe havens in the U.S. to Palestinian refugees who have immediate family members who are citizens or are permanent residents. If that's, I already see you shaking your head. So you would not support that, I take it.
Listen,
why?
There are safe third parties, safe countries where they can seek haven in the Middle East. We have a problem right now in our country with the wide open border. That's the number one issue in America. Most Americans are deeply concerned about it because we've imported dangerous persons. We know that there are known terrorists who have been apprehended at the southern border, over 340 of them on the terrorism watch list. But the scary thing is we don't know how many of them came in completely undetected. That's a real problem. The FBI Director, Chris Wray, testified to Congress under oath a couple weeks ago that all the red lights are flashing. What they mean by that is we're in a very dangerous moment in America because the border's been wide open for 3 years and counting, and we don't need to be importing more persons who might be problematic.
I want to ask you about your future, but we've been covering the border every single day here on NewsNation.
Yeah.
You know the political dynamics where
Sure.
things stand. You passed H.R. 2 in the House. That went nowhere. That will go nowhere in the Senate.
Right.
The Senate had the negotiated bill with the White House. That went nowhere in the House. The White House this week said that President Biden they do not believe moving forward with executive actions is the way to go. It seems like there is stalemate. My question to you is, when is the last time that you've talked to the president about this, and are we essentially in a holding pattern until November?
Well, unfortunately, we are. I've talked to him probably most recently about this maybe 3 weeks ago. We've been demanding action from the president. The president has unilateral authority to do it. He has executive authority, Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act. I have read to President Biden myself, word for word. If he deems it to be in the nation's interest, he could shut the border down entirely.
What was his reaction when you read it to him?
Oh, that sounds like the break the glass moment. Yeah, Mr. President, you think we've reached that point yet? We have, by some estimates, 16 million illegals have come across the border since he took office. They did it by design. We documented 64 specific executive actions that he and Mayorkas took to open that border wide. It's inexcusable, it's dangerous, it's catastrophic to the country, and the fact that he won't act, and that latest statement proves it again. You have to have a president who is committed to enforcing federal law. It wouldn't matter even if they did sign H.R. 2 into law. He wouldn't enforce it. That's our problem.
New article in Time magazine says it was an interview with Donald Trump and his advisors. He backs carrying out a massive deportation program of undocumented migrants and would rely on the National Guard. Quote, if they weren't able to, then I'd use other parts of the military.
Sure.
Would you support that if Donald Trump is the president and it gets to that point?
I would, absolutely. You have to restore law and order. This is chaos, and it's dangerous. We have dangerous people in the country. Central American nations have emptied out their prisons of violent criminals and sent them here. We have militants. I was down at Eagle Pass January 3rd at the epicenter of that, at the Del Rio sector. We brought 64 House Republicans down there, largest trip ever to the border. They told us at the Del Rio sector that 60 to 70% of the people who come across there illegally are single adult males between the ages of 18 and 45 of military capability, you might imagine. Many of them are militants. Many of them we suspect are violent persons and criminals and possibly terrorists.
You think the military could be used?
Well, I do. I think desperate times call for desperate measures. The challenge we have, very frankly, is going to be finding and rounding these people up because they're being dispersed around the country, and DHS is not tracking them. That's the problem. We do need mass deportation, but it'll be a very difficult task for us to collect them all.
Part one of our interview. I told you I thought we had some news here. What did you hear from the House Speaker, Mike Johnson?
Well, I heard a guy who's feeling his oats a little bit, right? He had a big win on the foreign aid package. And the other thing that is great for him, what's the news about today? It's not about Donald Trump. Joe Biden's in a pickle, right? These protests, and Biden doesn't know how to deal with it. And so if you're the Speaker of the House, just think about it this way. 3 weeks ago, nobody wanted to be Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, nobody would want to be his guy. And today, it looks pretty good. So you just wait. Every dog has his day.
The silence is deafening, Julia, he said, as it relates to President Biden.
Yeah.
And he drew a direct line between not having heard from the president in person directly before the cameras since April 22nd to Michigan, Nevada, and the other states that are potentially up for play in the election.
This is all red meat for Mike Johnson right now, and he is very much able to use this to go on the offensive against Democrats on this. And he can point to when he and his Republican colleagues went to Columbia University and called on Shafiq to resign unless she did something about this. But it's interesting. I'm seeing a bit of a pattern. So you have Mike Johnson saying that on air last night, but in my inbox this morning, it's a number of press releases from state Republican parties and Republican campaigns tying their Democratic counterparts to these protests, even if there isn't even a link to them. So I think we're starting to see more message.
Have you found any link to these protests with Democratic political leaders or to the White House? I mean, what would you have the president do? You think he ought to come out and make a statement? Well, the police are there. They shut down Columbia. They removed the protesters from the building. But I want to get into something about how dangerous Mike Johnson is. Listen to
what did you take
your
objection
interview.
to?
I take objection.
By the way, this is only the first part. We're going to get into his future on the other side of the break even more.
I'm sure the second part gets even better, but he says there were 300 men, 16 to 25, of human being males who came across the border, and they're of military age, and therefore they are dangerous, and we're going to round them up, or he'd like to round them up and take them back across the border. How offensive is that? Is anybody else offended by that? That somehow if they come here illegally and they are 16 to 25 or 35 and they're of military age, that makes them dangerous. See, that's the rhetoric Republicans use to say they don't want black or brown people coming across the border. You're going to round them up and send them all back to Central America or South American countries. And that is not the American way. No, I'm not. I think Biden ought to do something about it. I don't think the executive orders will work if they don't have the money. That's what the compromise bill was, or the bipartisan bill was, that Donald Trump killed for political purposes. But that rhetoric is dangerous because that's not what America represents.
What did you make of what he said there, Aaron, about the border and the article in Time magazine about Donald Trump's potential plans and saying, yeah, use the military if need be?
It's a complete 180 from what you're hearing from this administration, which is that what the speaker is laying out is really an all-of-the-above option when it comes to securing the border. He talked about executive action. He talked about military use. He talked about legislation H.R. 2. He went into a number of different steps, including executive actions that this administration could take and did take to not only lessen the border, but they could take to secure the border. He is saying that when it comes to getting our country back and making it a sovereign nation again, that in order to do that, he and President Trump would explore any and all options available to them.
So just violate their rights, their due process rights. They're here. There's a process for them to go past citizenship.
And it's not being enforced.
It is not being enforced.
They are being let into the interior of the United States. Absolutely be wanted.
By the way, this is why
you can't just shut down like that and use the military to take them back across the border.
This is why I wanted to ask Mike Johnson about it. A, we've been covering this story for years here on NewsNation. But B, I think this is going to be part of the debate that we're going to see down the line, especially as we get closer to November. What about this idea, though, getting back to the universities? I think we have a live picture right now of Fordham and what's going on in New York City. By the way, live picture as well of Donald Trump out on the road campaigning right now, taxing the endowments. Like, I hear a lot, and that's why I started this interview with what is actually in play, Mr. Speaker, because you talk about press releases in your inbox. We talk about all the time things that may or may not happen. Is it eventually going to come down to the money?
Well, this is a Congress that can't pass a budget. This is a Congress that can't do anything. And it took superhuman effort to get support for something that was very popular. He has a one-vote majority.
Yep.
This is, and by the way, whoever wins the House in the coming election, they're not going to have much more than 5 or so seats in the majority. We have a deadlock Congress.
In the House, you think?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's going to be close.
Okay.
And so this is some stuff people say.
Okay. So on the other side of the break, the final part of my interview with the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, the 3 words that he used when I asked about Marjorie Taylor Greene, why he thinks Democrats are coming to his rescue, and what he said when I asked if he wants the same job next year. Mike Johnson, part 2 of our interview. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation. We're back in a few.
To reach adulthood. That's why vaccines matter so much. For 40 years, Rotary and partners have delivered vaccines globally. Like here and even here, in your neighborhood and around the world, Rotary is ensuring children grow up safe from preventable diseases.
All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation, and the second part of our interview with the House Speaker, Mike Johnson. Today, the Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene said she will bring up a measure next week to try to oust Johnson from the speakership.
I also can't wait to see my Republican conference show their cards and show who we are, because voters deserve it. Is the Republican Party, have they finally learned their lesson?
When I spoke to the Speaker, here's what he told me about the Congresswoman, why Democrats are stepping in, and what his future could hold. So let's talk about your future.
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Mm-hmm.
No fan of yours.
Bless her heart, yeah.
Is she a serious lawmaker?
I don't think she's proving to be. No, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about her. I got to do my job, and we do the right thing, and we let the chips fall where they may. And that's my philosophy. That's how we're governing. We're gonna keep the train on the tracks and show the American people that not just what we're against, but what we're for, that there's a conservative agenda that is necessary to get the country back on the right track. And the way for us to do that is to keep and grow the House majority. Descending into chaos and closing the House down and vacating the chair again is exactly the opposite of what needs to happen.
Why do you think Democrats came to your side?
I'm not sure. I didn't ask for that. There's no deals made. I didn't request that of anybody. I'm just doing my job. I think some of them recognize that it would be chaotic for the House and bad for the institution, bad for the country. We're in a dangerous time. We have hot wars around the globe. The last time this happened, Congress was shut down for 3 weeks. Imagine if China moved on Taiwan during a time period like that, or something escalated in one of these other theaters of war. This is dangerous, and we should not be playing games with it. It's not time for politics. It's time for good policy.
Last one for you, sir. Mm-hmm. You want this job again in 2025?
Listen, I'm doing my duty as I've been called by my colleagues to do. I'll continue to do it as long as we're effective, and I think we have been. And I have big plans for the Congress and for the country. I think Donald Trump's going to win the White House. I think Republicans will retake the Senate, and I'm convinced we're going to grow the House majority. We have a lot of important work to do, and I'll serve in whatever capacity my colleagues think's appropriate.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, speaking with us late last night. All right, Mick Mulvaney, come on in here. I totally forgot to get your take and context there in the first block. My bad. My goodness, what was I thinking?
But I was enjoying watching the show. Don't worry.
All right. I wonder what you made of what you heard there from Mike Johnson and sort of what's going on with your party.
Yeah, Chris Steigerwald said something very insightful at the very beginning of the last segment when he said that, look what a difference a couple weeks makes when no one wanted to be Mike Johnson. Now Mike Johnson seems very comfortable. Keep in mind what I think the Democrats telegraphed this week is that they're going to vote to table this motion next week. Marjorie Taylor Greene has said in the press she's going to bring the motion next week. That's not a substantive vote. The motion to table is a procedural vote. And a lot of Republicans, even if they don't like Mike Johnson, or even if they were against Kevin McCarthy, might say, you know what, I'll vote to table because this is not the right time to take this up. And if all the Democrats or enough Democrats support that, we may not even have a vote on actually vacating the chair. Now, MTG will go around and say, oh my goodness, this was the exact same thing as a vote. But it can be, but it's not exactly the same. So I think Mike is a lot more confident in large part because I think he pretty much knows now he's not going to lose his job next week.
Yeah, so that's what. So next week, he's not going to lose his job. Everyone in agreement here. He's the Speaker of the House for the rest of this calendar year. Ooh. Okay.
What kind of odds are we getting? I mean, I think that's the most likely outcome.
Okay.
But we have to remember that if Mick is exactly right. The goal here is to cause pain, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey want to cause pain for their fellow Republicans and create difficult primary votes for them so that they'll cast this vote. And then, as Mick says, when they try to do the John Kerry and they say, I actually voted against the Speaker before I voted for him. It was a procedural vote. When they try to do it, it will be hard and they'll be on the record.
I don't necessarily, I'm sorry to jump in, I don't necessarily agree with that because it's easy for Republicans to message on this and say, this is not the time to be having a food fight in the middle of Congress. Sure. And so people might try to say, oh, it's the procedural vote. It is, and this is, they likely won't get to the actual motion to vacate. But Republicans can very easily say, even if you are a staunch conservative, this was not the time for us to be having these kind of internal fights on the floor. And so we decided to keep Congress moving forward because that's what you elected us to do. And when we get back in January, if they want, they can pick it.
It's a good message. There's no question that is a good and sound message and a winning one. But the thing is, not many more Republicans need to resign, and this is why I hedged on your answer.
Fair.
Not many more Republicans need to resign to just give the House over to Democrats.
Right, that's very true. Republicans are aware of that as well.
I agree with my colleague.
Hey, look at us.
I can't believe that, but I do. But you're right about that. No. In all seriousness, I agree with you. I think the dynamic here that we haven't talked about is why and where the Democrats are and where they're going to play as this moves forward. 2 weeks ago, nobody wanted to be Mike Johnson. Now Mike Johnson seems to be very confident they're going to be in place. The Democrats have got to believe that there's something good that's going to come out of this by saving him for now. But they also are going to keep him in his sights. That doesn't mean long-term and substantively they're going to save him down the line.
So, Mick, I want to wrap this up actually where we began, which is on the issue of what's going on these college campuses and how President Biden hasn't talked now on camera for 8-9 days, whatever that is, since April 22nd. And now we know he's going to be giving a speech at the Holocaust Museum here in a handful of days. What do you think, as you would know as a former White House chief of staff, the conversation is right now inside the White House about when and where to put the president on camera?
Yeah, if they watch the interview with Mike Johnson right now, what they think they saw is where Mike is going to take the narrative starting next week, which is where's the president? Where's the president? Why isn't he sitting behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office addressing the nation? And if these protests go on for another week or God forbid they actually get a lot worse, there's going to be tremendous pressure on the president. I remember we went through something similar, Blake, in the height of the government shutdown in 2019, and there were folks in the White House who said, yeah, we'll just ignore it. It's not a big story anymore, et cetera, people get used to it. And other folks like, this is on the top of the news every single night. President Trump ultimately agreed to address the nation from the Oval Office. It was a tremendous speech for him. I think Biden is going to get to the point where, I don't know if it's from the Oval Office, if it's at the Holocaust Museum, he needs to give a major speech on this, or else, goodness gracious, people are going to wonder, why do you want the job? I mean, this is not a story that's going away. One of the things you worry about when you're at White House is, do we want to overreact to a small story? This story is not going away. Again, if it gets worse next week, he's going to have to do something.
Hot Mic with Mick coming up, by the way, still here on the Hill on NewsNation. But before then, other side of the break, you are breaking down what?
I have here some numbers that are going to...
What is that, a parking ticket? Numbers on a parking ticket?
Will you validate? Do you validate here? I have here some numbers that are going to change your perceptions of this election. The radical, they're going to drop a bomb on this election like you've never seen before, or it's another poll. I don't know. Let me get back.
Steyerwalt breaks down on the other side of the break. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation.
Too funny.
All right, welcome back here to The Hill. So we are just over 6 months away from Election Day, but a new poll out today raises concerns for both candidates. For President Biden, the state of democracy. For Donald Trump, his looming legal issues. Steyerwalt here to break it all down. Chris.
So good. It's so hot. It's so fresh. This polling is so good. I promise you that we will come to you with, when we get good, high-quality polls that come out, and we've got a good one. This is Marist College, the Marist Polling Institute. We like Marist because they do a good job. And here's the top line in the head-to-head race across this great nation of ours. This does show some improvement for Biden, but it shows basically the same thing that these polls have shown for months, which is it's a close race. And this would actually look a lot like what we saw in 2020. Biden wins national popular, but Trump, as we've seen in other polls, is doing better in swing states. So it's close. Why? No one likes them. No, not no one. I shouldn't say that no one likes them. But we should say these are two astonishingly unpopular candidates for president. And the fact that only about 40% of Americans have favorable view of either of them. So Joe Biden won in 2020 because he was seen much more favorably than Trump. Now they're both in the dumps, and that's why you get a tie race. So what's the bad news for Biden? Bad news for Biden in this poll is that on the central issue in many ways of this election, question of is Donald Trump a threat to democracy? Democracy dies in darkness, ... Biden has not won this argument. And here's why. The Republicans all fell in behind Trump. You see here 37% of respondents say Trump would strengthen democracy. Who are those? Those are the Republicans. Who says it weaken? Democrats say it'd weaken it. 14% say no difference. So Trump has put his band back together. But look at Biden. Only 30% of respondents say that he would strengthen democracy. All the Republicans say he would weaken democracy. That's the 46%. But here's the killer, 23%. That 9-point difference on no difference. That means that Biden has not convinced. Now, this is some of the young people. This is some of the pro-Palestine protesters. This is some of those folks. But it's also people who just don't care. And because of that, he is not winning on the issue that's at the centerpiece. But here's the bad news for Trump. Republicans who used to be ride or die with Donald Trump on his legal problems and on the allegations of sleaziness. You see in February, people said he has done nothing wrong. More than half of Republicans. Now that's softening up. And what you see here is some buyer's remorse, right? So these are some DeSantis voters. These are Nikki Haley voters. These are people who previously were like, no, I think it's fine. Now that they've had to look at Stormy Daniels' mug on television every day and they've had to think about Donald Trump and do all this stuff, it's softening up. Those are the voters that Biden needs to win over, and that's how Biden could win and Trump could lose.
Steyerwalt breaks it down.
We did it.
Fate of democracy.
Yeah.
If we had shown that poll 3 years ago or in the days and weeks after January 6th, you would have said fire the person at the graphics department because those numbers are so incredibly wrong.
And this is, in fact, how the Republican Party got in such a pickle with Donald Trump, is that after January 6th, everybody said there's no way that this guy can possibly make it. He'll never be back because he was in such a bad odor.
So
and everybody's ready to move on.
How did we get from January 6th to there?
Partisanship is a hell of a drug. And they stuck with him. It was the Republican primaries were not a contest between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. They were a contest between, do you stand with Donald Trump against crooked Joe Biden and the Justice Department or not? And now this is the buyer's remorse phase where they're watching the trials play out. They're watching the stuff play out and they go, oh, yeah, right. It is still Trump.
You know, this isn't the only poll
Donald
that
Trump
shows...
live, by the way. Sorry, keep
right
going.
There. No. It's not the only poll that shows Democrats not doing so well on that democracy question. So whenever I've asked Democrats about this and say, look, how do you plan to message on this? They say, well, it's not necessarily democracy. It's your right. So your right to have an abortion, get women's health care, right to, live in a world without gun violence, that kind of a thing. So their messaging on it is a little different. And it just comes, as we're seeing the abortion ban or near total ban go into effect in Florida, Democrats zeroing.
But how do you reconcile, Chris, with Trump? I find this fascinating. He's over 50% that people think he's done something illegal and unethical. Mm-hmm. He's over 50%.
That's among Republicans.
Yeah. He's over 50% that he would be bad for the democracy, if you will. That's grown, right? And yet, he's still leading in the swing states. Do people, whether it's Republicans or otherwise, just blow off those high negatives like that and say, I'm going to vote for him anyway because the condition of the country is worse under Biden than a illegal Trump, if you will?
Franklin Roosevelt fundamentally, profoundly changed the relationship between the federal government and the people of the United States. A radical reinvention, a progressive wave swept over the country. How did that happen? How did he?
The New Deal.
Yeah, because people were terrified because of the Great Depression, and they became willing to change their principles on the Constitution and on other things. The reality for Joe Biden is you cannot feed a family. You cannot fill up your tank of gas on good feelings about democracy. Joe Biden's biggest problem.
But why do they blame him for that, though?
Well, because they always.
What can the president do about
I want to get your take too as well. No, that's fine. I want to sneak Aaron in here. And when you look at those numbers, what'd you see?
Well, I see a very solid base for the president, and I see that Democrats are going to have to change their messaging, to your point, Julia, which is they have been talking about the threats to democracy. If they don't evolve beyond that message, and we've seen these playbooks work for Democrats before in elections. Immigration has worked for them, the economy has worked for them, abortion has worked for them.
We just saw a special election.
That's exactly right. Yep. But if they don't evolve their message, they are going to be in a hard spot just trying to talk about threats to democracy because the American people aren't buying that.
Mulvaney?
The takeaway that I see from those numbers, fascinating numbers, and I'd be curious to know what Chris thinks about why those folks have moved from he didn't do anything wrong to he did something unethical but not illegal. But anyway, what I see from a political standpoint is that this 2024 election from the Democrat perspective will be about abortion. It's the only issue they are controlling right now. So my guess is they'll give up on democracy and start moving toward abortion because it's the only thing they've got working for them.
Okay. All right. Well, for all the big and heavy moments we have seen recently, would you look at this? A group of fraternity brothers at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, holding up the American flag on campus after a group of pro-Palestinian protesters replaced the American flag with a Palestinian flag. Dozens of police officers helped UNC's interim chancellor, Lee Roberts, put the American flag back up. But when protesters tried to take it down a second time, these students surrounded the flagpole to defend it from being taken down again. Real quick around the table, what do you see here?
Bros for freedom.
Oh, I'm going to get there in a second. Bros for freedom.
I see a scene from, quite frankly, a culture war right now.
What do you see, Scott?
Hey, America's still the greatest country in this world. It's got the best economy, and God bless the students who thought that protecting the flag and hoisting it is the right thing to do.
I love it. This is a great image. These are college kids who are standing there holding up the American flag. They got a ton of money coming in to support them for a big party. Good for them. I support them. Heck yes, go America.
By the way, there is a GoFundMe right now.
Is that our second agreement? That's two agreements.
Two of them.
Already.
There's a GoFundMe right now. It's called the Pi Kappa Phi Men Defended Their Flag. Throw 'em a rager. GoFundMe for exactly what they did. The goal is to raise $175,000 so they can have an epic party, right? I just checked a second ago. They are at $165,000 this day alone.
Those gentlemen, you know what those gentlemen can do? Say, we appreciate that, but we're going to give that money.
I was thinking the same thing.
You think so?
Trash, because
they go to party. They go to party.
I think they have a little bit of a party, but there's no way these college kids are going to be able to spend $175,000 on one.
It's going to that or a bunch of Natty Lights. I don't know.
They can put on a concert with that
better beer than that.
I will tell you this much for all that's going on, and you see those kids doing that.
I love it.
I mean, for the businesses who are looking to hire graduates when they get out of college. Hire those young men.
Good stuff.
All right, coming up here, still on the Hill, on the other side of the break, Hot Mic with Mick. Mick, you've got an article coming up we're going to talk about. Jay Powell talked up the market today, too, did he not?
He did. It was an interesting day in the markets, Yep.
All right, so we're going to get into inflation. Mick's column here that was posted on thehill.com. Other side of the break. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation.
Bill O'Reilly on Cuomo.
I don't say it often, but Bill O'Reilly, you're spot on.
TV's liveliest, most honest debate.
And I enjoy doing this with you. I would never tell anybody that, Cuomo, so keep it just between you and me, okay?
Tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on NewsNation.
All right, Mulvaney. I know this is something you've got an interest in. Here's what the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, said about top universities being funded by endowments, or at least their endowments, with a low tax rate. I think it's like 1.4%, give or take. And whether or not the federal government could take action given what we've seen recently on college campuses. Watch.
There's a lot of discussion about whether they should be taxed. They also get very generous tax benefits. They operate as nonprofits. All that is on the table. There'll be a lot of discussion, investigation. We have to do what we must to stamp this out. This anti-Semitism movement is dangerous.
Okay, Mick, how realistic is this? And if it's realistic, when?
Yeah, ordinarily it's not realistic. And Stirewalt was right, as usual, when he said, look, this is a Congress that can't even pass a budget. How do we really expect them to pass a controversial tax package like this? But don't forget, most of the Trump tax cuts from 2017 are up for renewal in 2025, which means Congress must take up a tax bill. And if you're looking to cobble together votes for support one way or the other, one way to get conservative votes is to come down a little bit harsh in some places on the university system. And if things don't get better soon, it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to defend those schools. You understand why Joe Biden's not taking a position, because he's got an election to win. But if you're in the House or the Senate, it's hard to defend anti-Semitism and a tax policy.
You want to show them the dance you were just doing?
Oh, my little finger guns?
Yeah, Aaron just had finger guns going because she was like, in the commercial break, you were saying the same thing, that basically the Trump tax cuts are coming up, and so this could be a thing.
Yeah, and I expect to hear more about the Trump tax cuts as we get through the election, right? I heard the former president talk about it today, that Joe Biden, if he won, would raise taxes because Biden has said that he would undo the Trump tax cuts. And so this package is going to be up in the next cycle anyways. So if you could toss in the endowments, you could get more conservative votes. You could get a lot more votes in that way. And so I definitely think that if Republicans win and they go after the tax, that would be where they could go after the
By the way, look at I'll get you in here, but I just want to show real quick the numbers of how large these endowments are. It's not chump change. Harvard, for example, is believed to be in the area of some $50 billion. You can even go down to Columbia University, which is 13th on the list, and you're talking about $13.5 billion. So even raising, I don't know if I said million, but clearly billion. Even if you raise it just a little bit, that's a lot.
This tax proposal to compel compliance is never going to happen, mark my word. It would put a chilling effect on those who would contribute. You wouldn't have $50 billion, those number of people and the incentives to give. And remember, most Americans, well, a lot of Americans have gone to colleges and alumni giving back. It would put a chilling effect on it. And what about smaller colleges or HBCUs who are struggling to have $1 billion endowment? Let me tell you something. You start taxing it, the monies are going to dry up. And we're going to come to the federal government looking for more money, all you colleges and universities. There's a better way to get compliance with colleges and universities on this anti-Semitism piece. The anti-Semitism is wrong. And I don't think any college or university would say, yeah, we promote that. You don't like how they enforce it, and you don't like their policies, so change their policies and leadership.
All right, Mick. Today was decision day for the Federal Reserve, one of the last 4 before the election. And as expected, they decided not to cut interest rates, citing a lack of progress on inflation. During his press conference, the Fed chair, Jay Powell, was asked if he would consider a hike in the future.
Unlikely that the next policy rate move will be a hike. I'd say it's unlikely. Our policy focus is really what I just mentioned, which is how long to keep policy restrictive.
Now, the major indices all jumped, Mick, as you know, after that statement. I was looking at it right now, Mick. The markets are basically on a 50-50 bet that we're going to see a rate cut, just one of them, before the election. That's probably more signaling than anything else, I guess, if it were to happen. But I wonder if you think if that happens, what impact right now are we looking at in November?
Yeah, you're down from a proposed 5 cuts or an expected 5 cuts just a couple of months ago. What I think you heard today, and there's something else that happened that didn't get nearly as much coverage, but what you heard today from Jay Powell is essentially, we don't know. We're probably going to keep things the way they are, because if we raise, there's a problem. If we cut, there's a problem. Maybe we're going to stay here for a while. But the other thing that they did today that didn't get nearly the attention was they announced they were going to slow the shrinking of their balance sheet. And I know that sounds like it's really boring, but it's actually quite important. The Fed's balance sheet, the Fed owns about $7.5 trillion worth of stuff, mostly treasuries. And what they were trying to do is sort of shrink that, and that is contractionary. It's bad for the economy and tends to sort of help lower inflation. But what they announced today is they were slowing that contraction, which is going to have a little bit of a juicing effect to the economy. Not much, but a little bit. Okay. And my guess is you're going to see the Fed using these other tools, not the interest rate, to try and drive monetary policy.
All right. Tell me about your op-ed in The Hill.
Yeah, we talked about it on the show a couple weeks ago, and it was one of those rare things that I think we got really good bipartisan support on. It was the cost of housing. Why is housing so expensive? And the Biden administration announced something over the last couple of days that put it back at the top of the media cycle. They announced some new energy efficiency rules for houses. The National Association of Home Builders says it'll raise the cost of the house about $31,000. HUD, who's in charge of putting out these regs, said, well, if you take all of the incentives we're going to give, it's not $31,000. It's only going to raise the price of an average house $7,000. But it's a wonderful example, I thought, of why housing is so much more expensive than it was when we were kids. You go back 40 or 50 years, the average age of a new home buyer was 30. Now it's 45. That is a dramatic change societally, economically. Just think about that. That's 10 years or 15 years less of saving. Most Americans save through their home. And if you can't buy that first house till you're 45, that's a big problem. And I also go into how this is a local issue, and the federal government should be forcing local towns and counties who want to take federal money to make housing more affordable through better land use decisions. Anyway, it was one of those things we've talked about on the show that was bipartisan. I thought it was a good thing to try and bring back into the discussion.
Hot Mike with Mick. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brian.
By the way, I think pretty newsy show that we had here with Mike Johnson off the top of the show.
Heck yeah.
Thank you to the Speaker of the House for sitting down with us. Thank you all for digesting it and breaking it down. On the other side of the break, as we take a live look at Pennsylvania Avenue here on Washington, are we about to see a major move from the administration when it comes to marijuana? Leland Vitter joins The Hill. Back in a few. All right, so before we say goodbye, here is a story that caught our eye. The Biden administration now moving closer to potentially destigmatizing marijuana. Now, while the White House would not comment today on reclassifying marijuana from a Schedule I to a Schedule III drug, the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, noted how the president has made this a campaign issue.
This is something that the president talked about during his campaign, and he said no person, no American who possesses marijuana, only possesses marijuana should go to jail.
The government currently classifies Schedule I as drugs that have no medical usage, like LSD and heroin. The host of On Balance, Leland Vittert, joins us now. Hello.
I am not an expert in these matters.
I am not either. I mean, we talk politics.
Yeah.
Not Schedule I.
This is all I would say. My understanding is consuming marijuana makes one lackadaisical, lazy, right? Mm-hmm. Is that what you want your voters to be ahead of an election?
Come on,
I'm just asking.
That's where you're taking it. I mean, look, I think this is probably like it's time to do something like this, and then it's time in an election year down the home stretch. I think maybe that's
look.